All right, here in Illustrator 2022, we have this option to create interesting patterns, and I'm going to look at the repeat function under object to do that, but I'm also going to show you kind of another way to do that as well. But let's first start with this particular way. So I have a logo here that I've made. It's grouped, so it's two objects put together. It doesn't matter what you have, but you can definitely play with this using whatever kind of illustration, vector illustration you have. So I'm going to go to object, and I'm going to go to repeat. Now there's three options in repeat. There's radial, grid, mirror. So I'm going to use each one of these artboards to show that. So let's start with radial. So I have one object that's grouped, and this is what shows up. So it's going to let me do a radial pattern, and I have like some pretty cool control over it here as well. So let me zoom in and give you a little look at what we can do here. So number one, we could use this up and down arrow to increase the number of objects we have in there. So it's increasing how many I have. Now let's bring it down and get rid of a bunch. Okay, so now I only have 4. So it kind of lets me play with that a little bit and see how that goes. Now I also have this option here, this circle option, to actually remove some of those. If I don't want to have it be a full complete circle, I could do that too, but I will keep it together. And the last option, well, not the last option, but another option is here. If I move this around, I could shrink it down or make it bigger. So I'm actually controlling the spacing between each individual object as well. And lastly, if I control the outside bounding box, I could make it how big I want to make it, but it constrains and keeps everything exactly as is. And once again, if I want to bring this back to there, I can, but all of them are there. Now there is another option to do that. So I'm going to go to object again with everything selected, repeat, and I'm going to go to options now. And with my options selected, I have options for radial, grid, and mirror. So this is a radial pattern. It was already selected. So here I could do the same thing, but now I could actually type in specific numbers if I wanted to. So if I wanted more repeats in my radial, I could add them. So just like going up and down like this, I could use that. And here, if I want to add in more space, just like moving this dot around, I have control over there. So that's the repeat, or the radial repeat option we can choose there. And if they were overlapping in a certain way, let's actually bring them down. Let's say they were overlapping because I want that orange to overlap. Let's go a little bit more higher. The orange to overlap, and I say I want to reverse the overlap. So this orange is on top of that blue, and now that blue's on top of that orange. So there's a way to reverse it too. So you have some really great control here, which is pretty cool. Say, okay, done. The next one I want to look at here, I'm just grabbing that logo again that I made a while ago, and I'm just bringing it in here to this new artboard. So now this artboard, I'm going to look at the next option and repeat grid. Okay, so this is something we've done many times before using another option, another method, which I'm going to show you too. But right away, what do I see? Look at that. It creates a pattern, a grid for me. Now I have ultimate control over this, just manually and obviously using specific numbers as well. So a couple options here. I could obviously use my bounding box to just increase the size of it. Cool. I hold down shift to make it proportional. I could use my left and right arrows to increase the spacing horizontally. So it's going to go horizontal control. Then I also have vertical control. Okay, so I can actually kind of play around with what I have there, but I can't see everything. Well, that's okay. That's what these ones are for. So if I want to extend out my pattern repeat, I can. If I want to extend it vertically or horizontally, wide or tall, and that's it. That's how we go. So I actually can control it using all these functions here, all these buttons, and I could obviously control it using the options. And once again, it's selected, so it automatically goes to grid. So let's see some of the options we have here. Well, number one, we saw what this did. This increases the size, so this is the same control as that. Let me bring that back down, get him a little bit tighter, and this controls the vertical. So let's see what that does. Yeah, I can make it a little bit tighter. Great. So this controls this, which is great. Now the grid type. Let's look at the grid type. So this is your normal, and then we have another option here. It's kind of like our brick pattern. So I could actually control the horizontal alignment, so it's offset, or I can control this vertical offset, which is interesting, or both at the same time, which is, once again, pretty cool. Actually, no, not at the same time. It's only one or the other. My apologies. I could flip the rows, and I could flip them an opposite way there as well, and I could flip columns horizontally, vertically. So once again, a lot of control can be made here just by playing around with these options, or obviously our manual options here as well. Now the last one is very interesting too. It's not much of a pattern per se, but it's definitely some pretty interesting control over mirroring options. So what I'm going to do here, this is kind of our transform, reflect or flip horizontal, flip vertical. So I'm going to go to Object and Repeat and Mirror. And what it does, it just mirrors it, which is great. So if I had a very interesting, intricate design here, I can mirror it and it would be mirrored. But now what kind of controls do I have here? Well, the first control I have is I can space out how close I want it to be mirrored. So if I want space in between, I can, great. And the other option is if I just move this, I could actually change the rotation of it. But I could also do that right up here in my control panel. I can control, let's just say 120. Okay, I can control it that way, and obviously that's what happens there. But once again, I also have control over, if I go to my repeat and options, because it's selected, it goes right to, actually no, it doesn't, it didn't go right to mirror. So a mirror, more or less, that's all you really can do here with it, is to control the angle. But obviously, as I mentioned, you also have control over here to say how far you want it to be away or mirrored in general. And that's it. That's what mirror does, which is pretty cool. Now, when I mirrored it, what happened is it actually got me into isolation mode, because it's only working on this. Everything else gets grayed out. I can only work with this, which is cool. That actually gives me that good control and lets me know I'm only working on those things. But I can obviously just click on the arrow here, go back, or double click anywhere, and it just brings me back there. And now that's it. I'm back there again, which is great. Now, how do I control it again? I just double click on it again to get back to it, and I can now play around with that repeat as well. It's all the same. Or I can just click away, double click, and it's back to normal there. Same with this. If I click on this, it already has those options there. If I click on here, it has all those options there. But now there is that issue. If I want this to kind of just be, I want to get rid of that. It's its own pattern. It's good. I'm happy with it. I want to utilize it in a certain way. You can use it this way, or you can expand it. Well, let's look at the other option here. What happens here if I go to Object, Repeat, and Release? Well, what does Release do? Well, it just brings it back to its normal form, its initial form, which is releases it. It gets rid of the repeat. But instead, if I want to keep this, but maybe I want to utilize it somewhere else, anything like that, what I would do is I would duplicate it, because this is the editable version of it. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to kind of like flatten it. Not really flatten it, but I'm going to kind of release it from its editable version and just kind of make it an expanded version. So I expand it, I say, yeah, expand the object and fill. There we go. So I do have still all these, and if I want to unite it using my Pathfinder, I can divide. Actually, I could divide all the individual shapes. If I unite, well, what happens, it unites everything. It's not what I want, but at least now it is its own vector shape. It's not a part of the editable version of the pattern repeat anymore, and I can use this to do, you know, whatever I want. So that's kind of interesting way to play with that, which is really cool. The one thing I also forgot to mention about this particular grid is, even though I'm repeating this grid, it's that first initial top left corner one that actually is still, I could play around with it. So once again, if I wanted to say change the color of it, I could change the color of it, and then everything changes color depending on this particular one I had here. Now, working with this particular one, actually, you know what, let me release this one as well. So when I double clicked on it, it took me into isolation mode. If I kind of don't want this to be editable anymore, I just want it to be exactly as is. Once again, Object, Expand, and now it's just a bunch of vectors, which is great, and they're all individuals on their own. So if I ungroup those, and now I could actually play with them just like that, and that's it. I could do whatever I want. There's my pattern. It looks great. Now, the other way to make a pattern, which I did want to show, was, once again, just to get that one object there. There's my object. That's it. That's my pattern. That's what I want to make. So I could do it a few different ways. I'm going to go to Object and Pattern and make the pattern, or I could click and drag this into my swatch panel and it's going to become its own pattern. So let's try it both ways. Object, Pattern, Make, and it's going to say, okay, this new pattern, this is what it is. It shows up in my swatch panel, and this pattern option shows up, and I'm in isolation mode specific to this, and now this kind of pattern shows up. Let me undo all that. Let me do the same thing, but I'm going to actually just click and drag directly into here. Now, once again, if it's a very complex graphic you're trying to repeat or make a pattern out of, it's going to be a little bit trickier. You might have to play around with some Pathfinder, some grouping, whatever. But generally, if it's a pretty simple one, you could do that. And if you already had a pattern kind of set up with multiples of these doing different things, you could drag that into, and it's kind of already a set up pattern, but I'm not going to do that. Now, the one thing that didn't happen when I dragged it in, it didn't open up my pattern option panel. That's okay. I just go to Window, and I can go to my pattern options, and there it is there too. So I have my pattern options set up, and I want to make a pattern, and now it's kind of back to that normal spot I was when I just dragged it in myself. So let's make a pattern. There's my pattern right there. Zoom in a little bit. Okay, new pattern is called. I could do different types. I could do a brick, a row, hex. I could do a few different ones. Now, we had some of this control with the pattern repeat option earlier, so let's try to do this. Brick repeat. Now here I have an option of offsetting, how I want the certain ones to be offset. Here I have an option. I'm going to click off of that link. I have an option of controlling the space, the width and height of it, so vertical and horizontal offset spacing. I have an option here to size the tile to the art so it works with the art. So if I click on this, I could actually size this down and it moves with it. And I believe if I shut it off, if I move this, it doesn't move with it, it just overlaps itself, which is pretty cool. But once again, I probably want to size it to the art, and I can still do horizontal spacing and I can still do vertical spacing as well. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And the other one here is just playing around with certain overlap, if there was overlap, and how I want it to be played around with. And here is also how many copies of this I want, or however it works. Let's just say I want a 9x9. Well, that's huge. That's great. But now actually, let's just say this is good. I'm happy with it. Let's apply it. So I could either cancel this, say, you know what, I don't want to do this. I'm done, as in I'm happy with it, and it'll save this. Or what I would like to do, always to be on the safe side, I save a copy, and let's just call this S pattern, and I'll say okay. And what's going to happen, it saves itself in the swatch panel as this very specific pattern. Okay, so I'm done. I'm just going to go back. Great. And now what I could do with that, it hasn't disappeared. It's still there. But what I do now is it's actually a fill. I could apply this as a fill. So I'm going to make a square. It's orange because that's whatever color, and I'm just going to click on that pattern I had, and there it is. There's my pattern, and it repeats itself over and over and over again and fills up whatever I want. Now if I increase the size of this, what it does is increases the pattern with it. That's okay. What I can do now, I make my shape the way I want, and a really cool function here is if I click on it and hold the tilde key on my keyboard, I could actually move the pattern around if I want it to be, very specific how I want it set up, and especially if your pattern is a little bit more detailed in a certain way. Mine's obviously very, very much a repeat pattern where there's really no difference. I could actually move this around with my tilde key. I'm holding down the tilde key right now, moving it in a certain way, and that's it. Now, obviously, also I can, if I were to do this, I can make it so it's not a fill, it's a stroke, which you can't see, but if I increase that stroke, there's my pattern there in my stroke. So it applies, it's a swatch. It could be applied as a fill or a stroke. It's a pretty interesting way to play around with that. So just wanted to show you the repeat options, some of the other attributes that come with it, and obviously how to release it so it's its own vector now. It's not a part of the editable version anymore, and how to make a pattern. Normally we used to make them, but once again, we can use either option, and there's some good controls here and there's some good controls here still. So making patterns in general, pretty great way to play around in Illustrator. What I also do want to show is, because I showed the actual older way or a different way to do a pattern here, I'm also going to do the same with my radial repeat and actually the reflection here, very simply. So what I would have maybe done with this one here, I'm just going to copy this again, I'll zoom in a little bit, is I could have actually just did a rotation with a kind of a bit of a step and repeat. So let's pretend I wanted to revolve this around, kind of we did this, because really what you're doing is you're repeating around a central point. So let me actually make a central point. So I'm going to say, let's revolve it around this. Now I'm just going to make that normal and get rid of that fill pattern, and let's just say that. So I'm going to align these two together. So I'll grab these two objects and align them together. Perfect. And now what I'm going to say, I'm going to grab this and I'm going to get my rotation tool. I'm going to click on my rotation tool, but what I'm going to do, and because I have my smart guides on too, smart guides really help out, Command U, is what I can do is I'm going to not click on it. I'm going to hold down Alt and click in the center. Notice how my smart guide actually gets me to the center. I'm going to click, hold down Alt and click. And what that does now, it sets up my pivot point, and now I could say something interesting here. So I could actually say, okay, how many do I want to go around this whole circle? Kind of the way we did up here. We had a certain amount there. I could actually say, how many do I want to go around? So let's say I want 10 to go around. So what I could do, I could actually do a little function here, say 360 divided by 10. Because I want 10 to go around. So I don't actually have to know the exact angle, the number of degrees. And what I'm going to do next, well, it actually ends up being obviously 360 divided by 10 is 36. So let's just do that one more time. Divided by 10. And I'm just going to do a copy. I'm not going to say, okay, I want to copy it. So now what happened, it copies it. And because of an action I just did, what I can do now is actually press Command D or Control D on a PC. And I press Command D over and over. And what it does, it just repeats that exact same angle copy I just made. And now I have the exact same thing I did up here, but now I have that rotation on here. Now, can I shrink this down? Sure. But do I have more control at what I did up here? I have far more control what I did up there. This is just one kind of older way to do it. And once again, if I have this over here, the one way to play around with this, if I want to do not so much a mirror, but obviously a reflection or a horizontal, I could just write, I'm going to duplicate this, but I'm going to press Command C, Command F. On a Mac, on a PC, it'd be Control C, Control F. And what it does, I just copy and I pasted in front. So I pasted the exact same thing in front by Command F. So now it's exact same thing in front. So now what I could do, I have it selected, I right click and go to Transform and Reflect, or I can go to the Transform panel here and do something very similar by clicking on that. And I can say flip horizontally or flip vertically, which is kind of the exact same thing. So I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to click on Transform and Reflect, and it shows up. Flip it vertically or horizontally. Do I want to mirror it more or less horizontally or vertically? Let's just say vertically for now. Okay, and then I could move it with my Move tool, and there's kind of my reflection, really, and I have somewhat control over that. The thing I don't have control over is that rotation angle, so I would just have to rotate it however and maybe bring it back in. But once again, it's not as it's a little bit trickier to do it than without using that mirror tool. So that was kind of an interesting way to do it. So you can do it a number of different ways, obviously, but once again, I wanted to show you the kind of older ways to do it and some of the newer ways. And some of the newer ways actually offer us newer options and can actually make some things that we couldn't do before possible.